Porsche Kelly, aka the Poetic Activist, is an author, motivational speaker, facilitator, and artist of many talents from Oakland, California. Her poetry and music are full of raw conviction, unapologetically spreading messages filled with truth. With a passion for God, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti racism, anti sexism, and social justice work, and mental health, especially among BIPOC folks, Portia aims to bridge the gap between faith and social justice. She creates atmospheres for conversation and dialogue on social issues and inspires others to find freedom in telling their own stories, using motivational speaking, workshop facilitations, and spoken word and her music. Her mantra to live by, is erase shame, tell your story, which is evident in her debut poetry book, Two Kinds of Fire, as well as her debut music project, Lessons Learned. So with that, I will leave it to Porsche Kelly to take the stage.
Thank you, Lacey. This piece is called Wonder Woman. Uh-oh. I'm gonna wait 2 minutes, 2 seconds. Okay, we good? Okay. Wonder Woman. I think I finally swallowed enough of my pride to break down my wall. The one that once made my hands scar after building it with tears disguised as strength. Don't let them see you weak. Don't let them see the tears in your smile. Loose thread coming undone like old pillows you restitch often. Don't soften your face. Don't let it reflect the feathers that make up your heart. Instead, let it rest like a female dog. Hard, lips giving off that feet shoulder width apart, hands to the front vibe. So sure of life on the outside, you wouldn't believe how sad the insides are. Don't sit down. Sitting means weakness. Sitting means you're tired. Sitting means you don't have the capacity to do what they already said you can't. You can't let them see you sweat, because that means you're nervous. And nervousness is a sign that you are incapable, inadequate, uncertain about how Wonder Woman you really are. See, this world will lasso your confidence the minute they see doubt in your eyes. How exhausting to be you and the woman they expect you to be you and everything else in between. See, I know too many women whose backs are broken from carrying the weight of the world, a world that forgets to smile and say thank you, a world that forgets to sit and ask, how are you doing? A world that forgets to grab tissues ready for heartache in the form of water to fall. They fall and we stay ready to pick them up. Tell me, who gonna pick up us? The ones whose capes need constant mending. Trending used to be women wearing masks like we got it all together, but I think we're finally tired of lying, tired of trying to keep our masks on. I'm at the point where I don't even care who sees me cry. The superhero in me will only die if I fail to acknowledge my kryptonite. So I change costumes from wall to vulnerable, from closed to open. I done spent too many years of my life choking on pride, and I'll tell you right now, I'm so imperfect, but far from worthless. And I finally understand that as a Black woman, the real strength is not always pushing through. It is not always lacing up your shoes to go fight battles they only use us at. Fake it till we make it type deal. No, the real strength be taking a breath and allowing ourselves to heal, being able to voice with no apology. Sometimes I can't be Wonder. Sometimes I can only be Black woman. And that is more than enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Portia. If everyone could just unmute themselves for a second, just give her love and
yes, yes, queen.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Thank you. And I have the amazing privilege to introduce our author tonight. Dr. Yolanda Pierce is a professor and dean of the Howard University School of Divinity in Washington, D.C. She is a scholar of African American religious history, womanist theology, race, and religion, and an alumna of Princeton University and Cornell University. Pierce served as the founding director of the Center for the Study of African American Religious Life at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. A widely published author, Pierce's newest book, In My Grandmother's House, Black Women, Faith, and the Stories We Inherit, was released in February 2021. She is a native New Yorker, mentor, public theologian, community activist, cable news commentator, and ordained minister. And she will be with us tonight to share her insights. And we're just so blessed and happy to have you here. Everyone, this is a open question and answer. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and kind of like, I guess, raise your hand and then you can say it yourself. I don't want to be the only person speaking. I really don't even like my voice that much. So the more other people talk, the better. And I believe we can get started. Dr. Pierce, did you want to say anything before we get started?
No, it's just wonderful to be here. I put a little HU in the chat, so always there's some Howard people. Ashley also represented.
You know.
And, so just the love, the Howard love every time. It's just wonderful. So it's wonderful to be here tonight.
Okay, I will open it up for questions. Lisa, I see that you have a question that you wanted to ask.
Maybe give me a minute and start with someone else. I just walked in my door.
Okay, no worries. All right, I have a question for you, Dr. Pierce. Let's start with how would you describe to someone who's not familiar with the term womanist theology?
Sure. So that's a really good question to begin with, because one of the things that I'm trying to do is make an argument for an everyday womanist theology. So let me define it. I'm a womanist theologian by trade. Like, that's my day job. I'm a dean of a school, I'm a professor, I'm a womanist theologian. They pay me. I'm a professional womanist theologian. It's a wonderful thing. But womanist theology, it arises in academic settings, primarily in the 1960s, late 1960s, early 1970s. There was the birth of Black theology and liberation theology, the vast majority of which was being written by African-American men or Black men throughout the African diaspora. The second wave of feminism is during the same time. And so you have the birth of feminist theology. And most of that theology is being written by primarily white women. And so you have Black men writing theology, which centered Black men. And then you had white women in the academy writing theology, talking about gender, but centered the experiences of white women. But some of us were brave. And so beginning with Dolores Williams in the 1970s on, a school, a field, a discipline in the academy was birthed called Womanist theology, in which the idea was that Black women could write theology centering their context and experiences, always taking seriously intersectionality, race, class, gender, social location, sexual orientation, that all of this was necessary to do the work of theology with the understanding and the idea, and it is a branch of both Black theology and liberation theology, with the understanding and the idea that any theology that blesses, frees, helps the least of these is a theology that is good for everybody. So that's the academic definition of womanist theology. But one of the things that I often argue in my work, this book and other books and other works that I've written, is that before it had a name, before it had an academic discipline that you could study or you could take a class, right? there were Black women doing womanist theology. They would not have considered themselves feminists. They would not have considered themselves womanists. That terminology wasn't available to them or accessible to them. My grandmother would have had no idea what feminism and feminist theology was. But I saw embodied, right? What I'm calling this everyday embodied womanist theology. And so that's what womanist theology is.
Thank you for that. I feel like I'm even learning something new still. Lisa, and also you guys, if you don't feel like actually verbally talking, you can go ahead and use your reactions, put a thumbs up, snap. This is a space for us to express ourselves as well as we learn. Yeah. Lisa, did you have your question?
Yeah, one of the questions that our book group was batting around on Saturday a little bit was, what does spiritual formation of joy look like for you as a Black woman?
So I love that question, and I'm glad you asked about joy rather than self-care. I get a lot of self-care questions. I think you do this kind of work, and people are like, tell me about self-care, and I can talk about that later. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I don't really believe in self-care. So you asking me about joy actually brings me joy, because I really think so. I have a lot of joy, right? I have what I would simply term the joy of the Lord. And what that is it is not a material condition. It is in fact a spiritual practice. So joy is a spiritual practice. Joy doesn't mean that you could be in the midst of deep grief and you can still have joy. You could be going through, and you can still have joy. So joy for me is a spiritual practice, an acknowledgement that I may be in a particular season, but trouble don't last always. It's an acknowledgement that whatever I am going through, I am not alone. And so the sense that I have of joy as practice is about sort of just a profound gratitude and knowingness, I would say, that I'm not doing this alone, and that I'm made in the image and likeness of God. And that before I was even here on this planet, I was being created for this moment, for this time, for this season. And so to practice joy for me is to practice a profound spirit of gratitude. That doesn't look like happiness, right? So you might have days where you're happy or not, or sad or grieving or angry or what have you. The full range of emotions, all are valid, all are necessary for the full human experience. But joy is the practice day after day of, I'm glad I'm here, and I have a purpose, and there's a plan for my life, and I don't have to do this alone. And even in my doubt, fear, uncertainty, where are you? Seasons of forsakenness, right? Seasons of why hast thou forsaken me? I can still find a measure of joy. So yes, that's what I would say. Joy is a spiritual practice, a spiritual discipline that we have to do, and has very little to do with whether we're happy, has very little to do with whether things are going our way. But as Paul would suggest, the being content in the place where you are is a spiritual practice for me in terms of joy. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Dr. Yolanda, could you speak to the concept of the no self-care that you just spoke about? I think I saw a lot of comments of people being super interested. And I too am very interested. I want to know.
Sure.
So.
Okay. So let me explain. So it's complex, but I want you to hear me. I think we should take care of ourselves, right? What has happened, I think, in society is that people think that they can buy their way to self-care, that they can consumer their way to self-care, right? And so the way we often talk about self-care is, oh, you know, I got a mani-pedi, which I love. Okay, I'm a New Yorker, love a good mani-pedi, right? Or, you know, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do some retail therapy, I'm gonna buy the fancy schmancy, you know, soaps and take the bubble bath and what. And the reason why I say I'm always reluctant when we talk about self-care is because a lot of what I'm often hearing are the ways in which we try to buy our way to self-care, right? And we're not gonna do that. There's no consumer model that's gonna get us to self-care. I'm not suggesting those things aren't important or wonderful. I have a Target problem. I like Target. Target and I are on the best of terms, right? And so when I do need my retail therapy, there's something about that big red Target that makes me right. But I'm suggesting that when we do in community talk about self-care, that we have to dig a little deeper. The caring for the self is to do some profound work. It is to address wounded places. It is to address lonely places. It is to deal with the hurts and the despair within our very being. It is to acknowledge, you know, where in fact people have transgressed against us. It is so I want to just simply suggest that every time someone asks me the question about self-care, they want me to say, oh, I have a lovely cup of tea and I spend time reading the scripture and that makes me feel better. No, that don't always make me feel better. Self-care is this constant work of really taking the self-examination work of it. And so I don't know, I've just decided I was just going to use my platform to say, you're not going to buy your way to self-care. You're not going to buy your way to self-love. That those material objects, and there's nothing wrong with them at all, but it doesn't get you the kind of soul satisfaction that real self-care will get you. You could be on an island and you can have self-care, right? You can be, as I was saying about joy, in profoundly tough circumstances and taking care of the self. And so it's just really trying to resist a particular kind of consumer model, you know, sort of capitalistic, like if only I can buy this thing will make me feel better about myself. And you might buy that thing and you might feel real empty. You're like, but that was supposed to be my self-care. So that thing, that object, that even sometimes that experience that you're purchasing, that's not the path to self-care. The path to self-care takes place kind of in the midnight hours, in your prayer closets, in those private, secret places. And often because we don't want to go there, we go to the next best thing, which is the consumer model of self-care. I think I just really am invested in people digging a little bit deeper. And so as much as I enjoy a nice cup of tea, I love tea, as much as I enjoy, you know, like I said, getting a good mani-pedi, right? But you can still be profoundly sad after those experiences of caring for the self if you really haven't done soul work. No, you're not going to buy your way to wholeness. You're not going to buy your way to wellness. You're not going to buy your way to a salvation, right? And I think that our culture just thinks that we can, and you can't. So that's my take on self-care. You all are kind, you know, to indulge me and to listen. But I really think it's important. I really do. It's a soul work.
Thank you so much.
And whoever got the pedicure today, tomorrow, I'm there.
That was me.
I'm telling you,
that was me.
I'm gonna have cute toes. Okay, I'm putting these sandals on. I'm gonna have cute toes. So that, do that and do whatever. Like I said, brings you joy. But that's real self-care is that kind of soul work. And I want to remind us of that. And it often is the kind of work that we don't necessarily want to do. And so we do these other things because the work we really probably most need to do, it's hard. It's hard. It's not easy, you know? Yeah, a little shopping spree at Target Yeah. Take your mind off your problems for a minute.
Yeah, that is so rich and hard, but honest and necessary. Thank you so much for that. Again, you guys, if you have a question, put it in the chat. Tiari, did you have a question?
Yeah, yes, I did. How you doing, Dr. Pearson?
How you doing?
For joining. I'm doing great.
Thank you for being here.
I appreciate you being here. I have a question, and I don't want it to sound like I'm going to present it because folks think it typically sounds like I'm going into a debate. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. So it's not that. I just have a hard time framing it. Okay, so I'm just going to ask it in as raw, and I hope I don't offend nobody. There's, I grew up in the Baptist church, and but I left just because I just didn't feel, I just didn't feel like I got frustrated with some things, because it tend to denounce a lot of friends, a lot of people that I hang out with, where they're Buddhists, folks that same-sex marriage, so I just kind of, you had on your page 13 in your book, you say that this is the heart of womanist theology, the needs of real human people before doctrine, meaning that we need to, you're talking about the how the word Jesus was healing. I think it was your grandmother. Was it your grandmother? Yeah, and another sister that was, she was from, her name was Murray.
Holly Murray, yes, sir.
Holly Murray, yes, who was queer, and also a woman, was the first Episcopalian minister. And I'm glad you said, that was liberating to hear you say that, because what I struggle with in making this home, making it a Christian home, is that, in short, I just disagree with John, Leviticus, and Timothy, who Timothy, who I think that's the one where it says women are supposed to be quiet and just shut up, and aren't to have authority over men. I think Leviticus says folks that engage in same-sex relationships are to be detested, and then in the part where I think John, where it says, you're already condemned if you don't follow Jesus, and so to me that just kind of goes against our whole indigenous African roots, the many spiritual. So it's hard for me to feel comfortable in that, and it's hard to, I think it's, when you ask the question, when you mention how we have to get to the needs of the people first before doctrine, I think that blocks a lot. I just look at how Sister Garza, I think from the Black Lives Matter, Patrice Cullors, I just see how they're kind of put on the side when they actually, founded it. But I think it's their sexual orientation, them being Black women, has a lot to do with that. And so, and they're addressing many marginalized groups, So how do you feel at home with that? Right. Particularly being a minister yourself.
Thank you. That was really rich. So comments and questions and all, so just dialogue with you, because I don't have all of these answers, but I have been thinking about this for a long time. And like I said, as a theologian writing about this, so I'm talking about people before doctrine. What I want to be able to do is respect that people have very different doctrinal positions on a wide variety of things, right? So just a small example, whether or not the particular religious body to which you belong baptizes by immersion. So you said you were Baptist. It got me thinking about baptism, right? And another tradition, baptizes by sprinkling. Just doctrinal positions. You may have one, but I'm actually not interested in the debate. I'm just actually not interested in the debate, because I'm interested in the people before the debate, right? And so what I only want to say to you is acknowledge I feel the same way. And one of the things that I describe in the book is actually leaving a space, right? Because sometimes I think we're called to leave spaces. Sometimes we need those voices of critique. You're familiar with the biblical text. Most of the prophets within the Hebrew Bible were kicked out of the city. They were not popular. Jeremiah could not go in the city. He had to stand outside of the gates, literally the gates of the city, to prophesy because they hated what he had to say. So sometimes you leave because sometimes you are a more valuable voice of critique, of prophetic critique, right? If you leave, and sometimes you stay. And that's a decision, between you and God. But I want to say that we have permission to raise these questions and issues. And I'm never going to allow myself to be in a space where I can't raise the question or issue. I'm okay with not necessarily having answers. I'm okay if the answer is, but I don't want to be in a space where I can't raise the question, because that's not a healthy space, right? Church, mosque, synagogue, I don't care where. If you can't raise these hard questions, if you can't, where's God when people are suffering? What, how are they killing 15 and 16-year-old Black girls in the street? How, if you're in a space that won't allow you to raise those questions, I want to say that that's the wrong space, right? So I want to respect doctrinal positions. I want to respect theological positions, the ones I share and ones I do not. But the human experience is at the center of this for me. And so before there was an established church, before there was a Nicene Creed or Apostles' Creed, before there was a Baptist, confession, and before any of that, there were just real people with real needs who were hurting or laughing or loving, and they were trying to figure out, how do I be in right relationship with God? So before doctrine, there were people. After doctrine, there are people. And so any space that doesn't allow you the full measure of your humanity to ask the questions, I would say that that's not a space I want to be in. I might not like your answers. I might disagree with your answers. I'm not going to agree with everything in the church to which I belong today. But I raise the questions, and those questions are met with respect, and they're met with, let's talk, and they're met with, let us reason together. And I want people to be in those kinds of spaces, because I think that's how you put people before doctrine. No disrespect to doctrine, no disrespect to the denominations and churches and branches and what have you. But if real people aren't being helped, what good is your doctrine? What good are the confessions? What good is the creed? When there are hungry people and homeless people and hurting people. Hungry, homeless, hurting people don't need you reciting the Apostles' Creed. They need to be fed. They need to be safe. They need to be loved. They need to be affirmed. And if we can't put those needs before we put our doctrine, I want to suggest that we're really not the followers of Jesus that we claim we are.
I appreciate that, sister. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for raising some wonderful and complicated and complex issues. I so appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Well, you bring a lot of comfort to me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was just a lot. I'm just still processing. I don't know if you guys are done processing all of that amazingness. Again, I want to ask, even if you have your camera off, you can always just unmute yourself to ask a question. This is a space for everyone to ask a question. I'm gonna give it a minute. If anyone has a question, you can chat it. I can read it for you. All right. Well, I have another question. So in your book, it talks a lot about basically the reckoning that you have with understanding your grandmother's faith and then digging the nuggets out of that, understanding that her faith was one out of survival as well. So like for me, growing up in Kojic, which is Church of God in Christ, very traditional. So all of the like mothers in white, you can't wear this, you better put a skirt on, no pants in the house of the Lord, all of that amazing, just traditional greatness, right? So for me, it was like one of those things where it's like, I love Black church, right? There, we have been doing the work this entire time, but I love the way you hold the greatness of it, but also holding it accountable for all of the harm that it's done. And is there anything, so you did a lot of the history, and then what, your writing was just amazing. Like the little tiny stories that just magnified. I was like, yes, you had to leave the church, leave the house, all the things. But is there anything that you would want to add to like somewhere where obviously you didn't just write this in this book today? Is there anything that you wanted to elaborate from the book that you feel like maybe you want to touch on more, or something that you want to elaborate from the book? I think it was, yeah, so in our current state, I mean, I feel like Black people, minorities have been always under the state of white supremacy, but recently it seems like it's been, I don't know, highlighted more. I don't know what it is, but it's like every day we see one thing go right, which is still not justice, where we see a guilty verdict for a police officer, which is awesome, yay, but that's still not justice, it's accountability. And then in the same exact day, we see 6 other lives being taken away from police, and then even a young person. So like, how could you tell us something about how it would, I don't have questions.
I got you. No, you're good. You're good. You had lots of good stuff in there. So I wanted to address the first part about, so also raised in holiness Pentecostal tradition. So I know Kojic, and so I wanted to address that. What I really wanted to say was that we can live in the space of the tension, right? And I talk about this tension. There are wonderful parts of maybe some of our growing up years that we want to hold on to. There are things I want to hold on to. The love that I have for the church, the music that I was raised in, the food, the embodiment of it. So DC has been on strict lockdown. And I was saying to someone, I really miss just hugging people. Like, to go to church was to be hugged, to be loved. We passed babies. I don't know what the traditions of the folks who are on the call, but this is a Black church tradition, which is somebody has a baby, don't bring that baby to church if you don't expect that baby to be passed, okay? I mean, like a football, like from person to person to person. And so you get to hold babies. I grew up with such an embodied sense of faith. And I love that, and I want to hold on to it. But I had to let go of some things, right? I had to let go of the people who mistake tradition for legalism, because I'm not called to legalism, right? And so I had to abandon the legalism. I don't believe God cares one bit about skirts, shorts, pants, blah. What? All of the stuff going on in the world. I don't think that my skirt measure. So I just had to, and to say that a lot of us have to live in the tension. I think about people who are raising children. There may have been some wonderful aspects of your childhood, and then maybe some things you need to leave behind, right? You may need to leave behind that your parents believed in corporal punishment, thought nothing of spanking children, thought nothing of hitting children. You might say to yourself, that's not something I'm going to bring into this next generation, right? So I'm trying to really encourage people about faith to say that you can live in the tension of your experiences, right? I want to hold on to the best of who I know God is and what I learned from people who loved me. They loved this little brown girl. They affirmed her. They like, you go ahead, baby, you sing that song. I could not sing. I would get up and sing with the children, and they were like, you sing, baby. I sounded terrible. I can't sing to this day, but they just loved me, and they affirmed me, and they told me I could do anything. So then one day I did everything. And then when I got to Howard and I was the first woman in 150 years to serve as the dean, it was because somebody told a 5-year-old me in the church, girl, you can do everything. Now, bless their hearts, they knew I couldn't sing, but you understand what I'm saying. So I can hold on to that, but I can let go of the legalism that has too many of us bound, right? The rules, the thou shalt nots, the this and the that and the third, that keep us bound. And I can let go of that. And I want to suggest this. I want to suggest that actually God is in the tension, right? Like that's where the good stuff is. That's where the nuggets are. That's where the faith is. God is in the tension. That legalism was restrictive, it was constrictive, it silenced me, it harmed me, and it's harmed many generations. That's that church hurt, right? But that beauty, that love, that joy, that affirmation, that let me know I could do anything in this world. And there's God right there in the tension, saying you can hold all of these pieces together. So I want to use that to just then your second point was about living in a world of white supremacy and how that manufactures itself in so many different ways. So one of the ways it manufactures itself in religious spaces, for me, which is what I talk about in the book, is African descended people being afraid of African religious practices. It baffles my mind, right? So we in the Black church were often called upon to pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Taught that formula in a certain sense to pray because we understood that the people of Israel in their prayers called on their ancestors. Those are not my ancestors. Those are the ancestors of a Semitic people in a particular region, in a particular time, and in a particular place, and that's beautiful. But what white supremacy did to Black people was to say, well, any kind of ancestral veneration and respect, that looks a little too like traditional African practices. And so strip that. And so for me, one of the ways we deal with white supremacist practices in religious spaces is to say, I'm not going to allow you to strip what belongs to me. So it's nothing wrong with calling on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I'm calling on the God of Vivian and James and Johnny May because my ancestors knew God. My ancestors walked with God. Right? And so I want to say that we cannot allow the pervasiveness of white supremacy and how it filters down into our religious spaces to keep us from a full, complete understanding of who we are in God. The 16-year-old that I was talking about and mentioned, because it's just been on my mind so much, this young woman, Makia Bryant, 16, killed, right? Watching people debate, should she have been killed? Should the police have killed her? Was she had a knife and this and that? And hearing nothing, almost nothing about her humanity, her made in the image and likeness, the Imago Dei, right? And so I want to say that what we cannot allow, gun, no gun, knife, no knife, I don't know, and I wasn't there. But what we cannot allow is a child, a Black child, to be stripped of her humanity, right? So I just, want to put those two things together because I think those things are really important to find ways to have deep integrity about yourself, about how you were made and how you were created. I say this, queer folk, Black folk, folk of color, whatever, God made you. God loves you, the essence of who you are. God doesn't ever say, okay, stop being yourself and become someone else. We're not called to that. And so to think, for me, growing up in Black spaces, so many people were taught, you can't call your ancestors. You have to call someone else's ancestors when you pray. I just reject that. Because I know that that's a result of white supremacy. I know that is a result of somehow saying that the God who sustained my ancestors through the Mayafa, the Middle Passage, transatlantic slavery, I can't call on that God who sustained them. No, I'm calling on that God. I'm calling on that because that's the God that I need to show up for me. Right. So those are some answers to some of your questions. And thank you for what you put on the table. I want to say God is in the tension.
Thank you so much for that. We have a question from the comments. Could you describe how does womanist theology fit into liberation theology? Mm-hmm. And also give like a tiny tidbit of what liberation theology actually is?
Sure. So womanist theology would be considered a branch of liberation theology. So think about, sort of liberation theology up here and all of these branches radiating from it, including Black theology, mujerista theology, theologies that are being written by our Asian American sisters and brothers, right? So that you have these branches that come out of liberation theology, and the principal idea, just foundational for liberation theology, is that God has called us to be free and free indeed, that the human condition is one of freedom, that's God's plan for people to be free, right? And so therefore those chains, metaphorical, real, physical, right, that shackle are meant to be broken. And so that God is on the side of oppressed people, that God has a preferential option for the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized, the least of these. And the reason for that, right, is simple. Because when the least of these are uplifted, everyone's uplifted. Instead of our models, that trickle down model where, oh, it's good to have billionaires because it'll trickle down. It don't trickle down. You're not getting none of that billionaire money. So that actually does not work, right? But the least of these, when they are elevated, when hungry people are fed, that means there's enough food. Everybody eats, right? And so I want a God where everybody eats, like literally, like that's just a foundational part of my theology. There's enough food to feed everybody, but only some people eat. Liberation theology says everybody has to eat, right? Because God calls all humans to a condition of freedom. Whom the Son of Man has set free is free indeed. And so then you have these branches of liberation theology. There's womanist theology, there's Black theology, like I said, other theologies that are coming primarily from peoples of color, but really engage in this project of profound deconstruction project, right? Which is that we have to tear down so many of the constructs that keep us from our freedom. We have to tear them down even when we built them, because that's another piece of this. Patriarchy isn't the domain of men. Patriarchy is a system, and it's maintained and constructed by all peoples, not just by people who are male identified. Right? And so thinking about this work of deconstruction, thinking about this profound deconstructive work, right? Tearing down walls, tearing down strongholds, tearing down all of these things that keep us from a full, free expression of who God is in us. And so that's where liberation theology is. And then you have these branches of liberation theology that are doing it, we would say contextual theology, doing it from the ground, from their context, from their place. I will say, because I'm sorry, I'm a teacher, so I enjoy talking about this stuff. So here's the way we often think about it. Womanist theology, it has to critique really white theology, because there's a way in which white theologies have often posited that they are universal in scope, right? So Barth or Tillich, right? The theology that they wrote was universal. But the theology that they wrote was simply their experiences, influenced by their schooling, their education, their context, their families, their churches, their they didn't write it on the moon. There wasn't a systematic theology being written by Paul Tillich on the moon, where there were no, he was a white man in white spaces going to white church. Right? So he's writing this from his context, and yet that's supposed to be universal. But somehow, because Black women are writing it, it's not universal. And I simply reject that. I think that as a theologian, I'm interested in the human experience, but told through the lens of my context. And I think that people can learn from that. Just like I can learn from the great theologians of the canon, Luther and Calvin and all of them. So there's room to learn and to grow. But liberation theology and branches of liberation theology that are contextual to people's experiences, you start with what you know. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. And so they were thinking that they were writing something universal, but they weren't. They were just writing about their own experiences and their own perceptions and their own understandings of God. And you get to do the same. And so that's how kind of liberation theology and womanist theologies and these other theologies come together.
Thank you for that. I think Anne Marie, you had a question. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Lyrical Assembly for creating this space, because I was just scrolling on Facebook and found this jewel, if you would. So thank you. Ironically, as a teacher myself, I think what I'm hearing from Dr. Pierce basically is we have to unlearn what we've been taught. And we have been taught so many myths or someone else's story. And I've been part of that system myself in teaching my own children, my own two boys who are now adults in their 20s. So my question is, because I'm moving into this space in light of what's going on in our world, where you have the intersection of faith and social justice, which is what attracted me to want to join. How do we begin this journey? Like, first thing I know, I have to go out and read your book. So I'm going out, I'm going on Amazon to go ahead and order that, because I wanted a grounding and a foundation and understanding of where do I begin on this search. And some of the issues you're bringing up, I've heard Howard John Wesley, pastor at Alfred Street Baptist Church,
yes.
where we dare to think outside of the context of what we've been told. On the other hand, I want to be true to the Bible, true to the faith. And there is my personal tension, for example. So where do we begin to explore this space, and how do we engage young people? Because I have to say, my sons, who I raised, quote unquote, in a traditional manner, traditional beliefs, they are not walking in their faith because they have questions. And either I didn't know how to answer it, or they just had questions grander than I was prepared to give them. And I don't like being in that space. I wonder if you can comment on those two issues. How do we begin to explore? Where do we go to learn more? And how do we engage our young people back to like a faith-based belief system?
Thank you. Those are great questions. Howard John Wesley is a wonderful pastor, and that's a wonderful space. If you don't mind, let me take your second question first about young people. I'm very fortunate to do the work that I do, which is training men and women for ministry. That as the dean of a divinity school and a professor, I work with young people. I'm hopefully mentoring and helping to develop them. So I want to say, here's my answer to your second question, in part at least, as I'm just going to try to address it, about young folks. I think that we don't allow people to experience the full range of what they need to experience. And I'm thinking about this because I was scrolling through the chat. I was taught that there was something wrong with anger, right? And so in my growing up years and in church, you could not utter a curse word. You may have thought one, but you weren't going to say one, like, cause that, right? And anger was something bad, right? Many Christian churches are heavy on what we call virtue ethics. And so virtue ethics, just to be very brief, the virtues, right? And so the patience and kindness and those are wonderful things. This is lovely, patience and kindness and joy and fruits of the spirit. Oh, it's wonderful, wonderful thing. But no one ever told me that anger, grief, depression, despair, all of those were valid emotions, and that they had actually been given to me by God, right? I was taught, be a good girl, and then when I grew up, right, be a nice woman, right? Don't be the angry Black woman. Don't. And I say this, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I think that a lot of young people are angry, and I think they're rightfully angry. And our churches and our religious spaces have failed to give them a safe space to be angry. James Baldwin says, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. The world in which I'm watching Gen Z inherit, we got to stop talking about millennials, y'all. People are like, oh, the millennials are young. The millennials are now in their 40s, and we got mortgages, okay? Gen Z, okay? These 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they don't have a space for the full right. They are angry. We're killing our planet. We're killing each other. And where do they take their anger if the church is saying to them, just be nice and good and kind and you'll, right? So we've got to make space for people's anger and their rage. We've got to take seriously their depression and despair. We've got to take seriously when someone says, what's the point in all of this? We're killing our oceans. This planet might not even be habitable in a couple of generations, right? And when religious spaces begin to take that seriously and allow people to talk about that and work through that, then I think you'll see young people say, this is a place that I want to be. The reason they're out protesting in the street, their protests are profoundly spiritual, because they're saying, this is where hurting people are, and I want to be out here with them. The reason they're in Ferguson and New York and Chicago, and they're protesting and they're rallying and they're marching, it is profoundly spiritual. It is feeding their spirits in a way that our religious spaces are not, because they can be angry. And so I tell people, because I'm just this very nice, happy, I really am, like, I have a great sense of humor. I just like to laugh and smile. I said, but I'm also an angry Black woman, and I'm unapologetic about that anger. I have the righteous indignation of what it means to live in a Black woman's body in this world. And that has me profoundly angry most of the time. That doesn't mean I can't be a kind person or a loving person or a virtuous person. It means I'm paying attention to what's in the world. So we've got to give young folks spaces to be who they are, to tell us why they're hurt and angry, to tell us why they're going through, and not dismiss them, right? And then the first part of your question that I'm now addressing, secondly, is how do we begin to do this? So I'm being the teacher again, and you're a teacher, and I would say we need other materials, right? I'm a reader of the biblical text. I study it in its original languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic. Great, that's a part of what I did when I was a PhD student and part of my work. But that's not the only thing that reveals God, right? Our sister started us off with some beautiful spoken word poetry. God is there, right? And so what I'm saying is that we have to make sure that we're not just doing this work saying, here's the Bible and nothing else, because that's actually a form of idolatry to say that the Bible, that God is only contained within this book. Your God is so small that your God is contained within a book? Mm-mm. God is bigger than that. So I ask people all the time, what are you reading? What theologians are you reading? What curricula are you using? What kinds of books are you engaging? What are you listening to? What kind of music are you listening to, right? To say the presence and the fullness of God is also in some of these spaces, and that we have to be willing to engage that often the fault is on us because we've been very narrowly taught that the only way we'll learn about who God is if we read the biblical text. No, that's the only way you'll learn how the God of Israel operated at a particular historical moment in time. But God is constantly revealing God's self, right? Through our lives and our experiences, through our interactions with one another, right? That God is constantly revealing God's self. God isn't silent, we're just not listening, right? And so what other source materials are you using? What are you reading? What are you listening to that can edify and affirm your soul and bring you closer to God? This is not to be dismissive of the biblical text, which I love. I truly, truly love. But it is to say that, you know, when one of our most wonderful Black women poets said, I found God in myself and I loved her fiercely, because she said, I'm going to use some other source materials for how I know and understand God. And I think that's really important for the kind of work that we have to do, this kind of profound deconstruction, right? So that we can rebuild again, we can build anew. It isn't to tear down with no purpose. It is to tear down the things that have been the stumbling block and the walls, so that we can build bridges, so that we can build connections, so that we can build tables where everybody can sit and eat, right? And so we have to really think about what materials we are limiting ourselves to when God is revealing God's self all around us in so many profound ways.
Thank you, Dr. Yolanda, for that. We are running out of time, so I wish I probably could talk to you for like another 2 hours or listen to you speak. The last question I wanted to pull from the chat is this question of what is the role of reimagining and creativity play in terms of moving us forward in this work of justice? And then I also saw a question that I don't know if you wanted to also touch on about maybe how that plays into the synergy between the AAPI community and the Black community right now in terms of conversations about racial justice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of loaded questions, but we would love to hear your thoughts on that.
And I was trying to even like read the chat because there were so many good things in there. So please make sure that folks know, I just want to say this before I answer your question. You can contact me. I mean, I will go away and we'll end, but folks can still contact me because I know I won't get to some questions and I would love to be able to address that. So, okay, listen, everyone has a theological imagination that they can tap into. So theological imagination is really important to me. This is why I think that you cannot do the work of liberation without our artists, our writers, our thinkers, our poets. A lot of times people will come to me and say, what can I do? Right? So some incident has happened, someone has been killed, some foolishness has jumped off, as it does, you know, every single week. And people feel helpless. They're like, you know, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm not even a preacher or something like that. So what can I do? And I said, do the thing that God has gifted you for. If you are a singer, sing. If you are a knitter, knit. right? I said that on Twitter. So I live on Twitter. Twitter is my digital home. So y'all can come visit me because I'm there all the time. I said this, I said, because I love to knit. And so I said, you know, if you're a knitter, knit. So someone DM'd me and said, like, how can I knit for the cause, right? And I said, so knit some baby blankets and donate them to the neonatal ward at your local hospital. Because you get it that all of this is connected. Our humanity is connected. So you might not be able to do something about that, but you can do something about something else. So where is your theological imagination for the cause of liberation? What gifts do you have? What passions do you have? If you sow, right? If you want to rally and march and that's your thing, right? But there may be members of our disabled community who are like, well, I can't rally and march like that, right? And that doesn't mean that they're not willing to work for the cause of liberation. So what I'm saying is God has gifted us with theological imagination for the purpose of liberation. That might be mentoring, you know, little kids, that might be sewing, that might be singing, that might be, you know, the front end political work and canvassing and, you know, knocking, you know, for votes or whatever. It doesn't matter. But it is all of value, but we just have to be imaginative about what we can do and how we can do it. And so then I say that to answer the second part of your question, which is about relationship building between Black folks and Asian folks and Latino folks and Asian folks and Black folk and blah, 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 white folk and all of this, right? So that the relationship building can also be a work of imagination, and it doesn't have to take place and do what it has done historically. So everybody loves to point to the March on Washington, right? With Martin Luther King. Tremendous historical moment. This is a sidebar. If everybody who said, oh yeah, my mom and them marched with, I was like, there would have been 8 million people because apparently just like everybody now, but I digress. But anyway, so we look at that and we say, wow, that's this moment of, you know, racial solidarity. And what I want to say is these moments of genuine connection and solidarity, they take place in coffee houses, kitchen tables, classrooms, right? They take place on the soccer field, that we're not limited to someone's model to do the work of solidarity and community building, right? That doesn't have to be, okay, we're having an official conference and we're having a panel and a keynote speaker. That's boring. And so part of the reason why we never really progress is because we're really not building relationships. People building resumes, right? So they're building their resumes by saying, you know, I spoke at the racial solidarity thing and I was the keynote speaker. That's ridiculous. You're not building relationships. Relationships are built one person at a time, one conversation at a time, one meal at a time. Use your theological imagination for the cause of liberation. And when you open up to what those possibilities are, then I think you have and find a space where God will meet you and will really bless your efforts. Relationship building, not resume building. That was it.
Wow. I am so happy to join this time with you guys, as well as I think Christian was able to put in Dr. Pierce's Twitter. If you guys,
oh, thank you. Yes. Come follow me on Twitter and say hey.
If you guys have your questions, you can go ahead and add her on Twitter. I want to reintroduce you guys. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'm so happy I heard your voices and not just mine. Also want to reintroduce you guys to the Poetic Activist, as well, also known as Porsche Kelly. I think the quote Dr. Yolanda was referring to earlier was from that poem, right? About the fire, God in me. After I learned how to love the divinity inside of me, then I was able to love the woman fiercely, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was her words. So without further ado, Porsche Kelly is back.
Thank you, Ashley. So I'm just gonna close with this poem. I was trying to figure out like what poem do I want to do? It's this poem called Justice, and obviously I feel like it's appropriate for I want to say for this time now, but unfortunately it's always appropriate. I write these pieces where I want them to become irrelevant one day. But we continue to see, the lack of regard for Black lives, for brown lives. And so I hope this piece speaks to you. If ever anyone is offended by anything I ever say, I always say, I'm not sorry, but I'm always open to have conversation and dialogue. So this piece is called Justice. I've seen badges turn brown faces into red paint splattered on sidewalks, pavements where mothers, fathers approach their dead like burning bush. Take your shoes off, for you stand on holy ground. Only sound you can hear after another extra sun-kissed body loses breath is screaming from the side of heartache and silence from the side of ignorance. I've seen death. I've seen animals get better treatment than Black women. Furry species God gave us dominion over, coddled, hugged, loved, while two-legged beings that look like me and my mama are served just enough respect for a female dog. I think that's irony. I've seen folks who claim they believe in Jesus turn their backs on the very people he would have been found spending time with, use their lips to speak against protests, but quickly zip them when it comes to speaking against white supremacy. Their hearts are more concerned with how many robotic conforming bodies are present in their church rather than providing safety and love for the hurt. I've seen the guilty plead innocent. The bystanders spit on the graves of little Black children by morphing into Sandra Bullock, rather take their chances paddling through river with eyes resting in blindfold to make it to the other side, home of the blind. I think they think truth is like a tree that falls in the forest that no one hears. If I ignore the devil breathing down my neck long enough, maybe he'll just go back to the hell he came from. Will come hell or high water. I'll be damned if I tell my future sons and daughters that while I sat back, feet up on the ottoman, a bowl of popcorn spilled on my lap, whispering to my conscience, it is what it is. The world of Black bodies was on fire. I would need God to smite me before I ever let my mouth become standing water, a breeding place for diseases like ignorance and stagnation. You've never seen justice appear until undetermined lips conjure her up. Never seen her red bottoms set foot on the floor until the red carpet is rolled out. Never seen her speak unless demanded by desperation. I wonder where we would lay our heads at night if every time society told Black faces no, we ran away. I wonder where Black feet would have truly migrated if we gave up in the midst of cold hearts denying us warmth. Where would I have ended up? Had all my ancestors kept that yes, master mentality? Thank God I'll never know. Because my bloodline is filled with no, filled with hands that grew tired of picking cotton, with eyes that refused to remain illiterate, with broken necks hung running away, with pockets that remained full of bus money as feet chose to walk, with spat on faces and blown out eardrums during sit-ins, with tears from tear gas and pepper spray, with bombed churches and broken living room windows, with graves holding tiny coffins, with small losses and big wins, mourning and dancing, tragedy and triumph and justice. Justice, she never shows up out of pure will. She's always to be persuaded, to be convinced, to be wrestled with until we get what we need from her. Justice never opens her door and welcomes us in. We throw rocks at her bedroom window until she is annoyed enough to come down. We force her to hear the sound of fists pounding against a broken system that we will tear down till there is nothing left. We make her give us free. I've seen Black bodies reverse plagues, turn blood into rivers of hope, turn battlefield into promised land. The Black migration is a continuous exodus, exiting every room that would try to keep us shackled and bound. Take your shoes off, for you stand on holy ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, can you guys unmute to show her love, please?
So much.
Beautiful.
Before we go, we just wanted to reiterate, we have some information in the chat. We have the link to Dr. Yolanda's book, the link to Porsche Kelly's book, as well as their different social media handles. Please stay connected with the lovely women who spoke today, as well as this event is brought to you by Lyrical Assembly. Lyrical Assembly is a nonprofit. If you were touched by this event and would like to see more events like this, please consider supporting the work of Lyrical Assembly. You could become a monthly donor for as low as $5 or subscriber. Lyrical Opposition is a nonprofit organization, so your donations are tax write-offs. You can even ask your company for a match program as well. We also have a Wednesday night podcast. It's called Lyrical Ones. Lyrical Assembly's Read for Resistance book club meets on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And that is how we were able to be blessed with this amazing book. Yeah, if there are any other questions, concerns, we're just so happy you guys decided to spend your Saturday with us. Again, thank you so much to Dr. Pierce as well as Portia. I'm so happy to see all of you. And I hope this was a moment for us to rest, learn, and continue the work. Also, in case you are not reading the chat right now, if you want to stay connected, go ahead and text READS, READS, to the number 415-903-7699 to join the book club. Our book club is amazing. It's a community. It's a sacred space. So that's how we like to start our book clubs. We read faith books, not faith books. We're just trying to learn and do better. All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye, everyone.